So I'm Gabe De La Rosa. I'm the communications coordinator over here at the LTER network office. We're really excited to have this second installment of the visual media series. This is a really great initiative put on by our graduate student committee, which is a representative committee of graduate students from all across our sites who wrote us a proposal and got a bit of funding to put this series together. And we've had one great talk already, and we're really excited for this second installment with Jasiek. If I'll let a couple of the students introduce themselves in a minute, and but I will say, if you do want to keep up to speed with events like this, find out when they are, what they are. There's a couple ways to do that, especially in our landscape of changing social media. We have a great newsletter, and I'll drop the link to that in a chat, that comes out once a month. And we also have a community platform that we just launched this year, where a lot of these events get shared. The nice thing about this community platform is anybody can share anything. So we get a lot of, things like brown bag webinars from all across the network, job postings from all across the network, events like this, just a constant stream of sort of what's happening. And the nice thing about that is, as opposed to a once a month newsletter, these come out continuously. So you know when the events are, in plenty of time, and can sign up and attend. But yeah, we're super excited to welcome Jasiek, and I'll pass it on to Maria for a quick introduction.
Thanks, Gabe, and thank you everyone for coming, and shout out to all the rest of the grad student committee. If you want to, I don't know, raise your hand or something. We have our team on the call here, so thank you for coming and helping to organize. And thank you especially to Jasiek for joining us today, all the way from London, so it's like 4 p.m. over there. Just a quick intro. Jasiek is a senior art editor at the science journal Nature. He has created many amazing infographics and designs that convey complex scientific stories, ranging from migrating songbirds to exoplanets, a lot of really cool stuff in between. Also, he has created wonderful book cover designs, so invite you to check out his website for those. And yeah, for audience members, we will hold questions until the end of the presentation, but please be thinking of them throughout so we can have a good discussion. And for those who signed up for the show and tell feedback session, we will kind of transition to that after the Q&A discussion session. So without further ado, take it away.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Maria. Yes, my name is Jasiek Krzysztofiak. I work as a senior art editor at the journal Nature in London. And thank you so much as well for inviting me here to speak at your webinar. I'm really pleased that you find our work at Nature interesting and that you want to hear more about it. First, a few words about my journey as a form of introduction. My adventure with information design began in Poland, in Krakow, where I studied design at the Academy of Arts. That was in this lovely building, actually. I was interested in public transport maps at the time, and I chose transport mapping as my dissertation topic. And a few years later, I was working as a graphic designer in Krakow and decided I'd quite like to go back to university and study some more about design. And I explored a few different options, but ended up applying to Reading in the UK, which is well known for its typography department and type design course. But one program which was especially interesting to me was MA Information Design. And after a year in Reading, I completed my degree. And in 2011, I moved to London with some uni friends. And Lark headed that Nature's art team was looking for an assistant art editor at the time. And I applied for the role and I got the job. This is actually a picture of our team. There was one of the Christmas events a couple of years ago. In case you haven't heard about Nature before, I'm sure you did, but it is one of the world's oldest and most cited academic publications. We are a weekly magazine which publishes peer-reviewed research from all different fields of science. This multidisciplinarity is kind of unique because scientific journals often specialize in particular scientific field. Nature publishes papers from all disciplines, from cancer research, quantum physics to artificial intelligence. The editors also set a very high bar for submitted manuscripts, and only a small proportion of submitted works get selected for publication. Our design team, which is based in London, we create infographics, data visualizations, and scientific figures for a very demanding scientific audience. But if you're not familiar with the magazine, it might be easier to show and walk you through some of our magazine content. Starting at the cover, where each week we feature one of the papers published in the same issue. I myself usually work with graphics, and I don't often get involved with the cover artwork. This is responsibility of our creative director, Kelly. This is followed by things like tables of content, editorials, and some short sections like research highlights, which is a selection of very short summaries of the most interesting stories of the week. The news section, the news section is mostly short breaking stories about the most interesting science of the week. These are usually written by our in-house team, our in-house reporters, and these are published first on the website before they are reformatted for print. These stories are often illustrated with data, and these charts are all created in-house by our team. They can be quite varied depending on the story, and here's a random selection to illustrate that. The news section moves at a fastest pace from all the magazine sections, and it's important for us to be able to create charts like this very quickly. Often a story needs to be published on the same day, and we will only have a couple of hours to turn things around. And new features is the section which is probably most fun to work with from my point of view. These are long-form articles with longer deadlines, written by our reporters or commissioned from freelancers. There are often good opportunities here for more complex infographics, maps, illustrated diagrams, or sometimes our own data analysis. Also in features, we often hire photographers and artists to do either photo shoots or create illustrations for us. It's not always the part of the magazine with the largest readership, but these are often really great stories, which end up winning awards in journalism and design competitions. Then in the opinion section, these are longer stories, which are always commissioned from external authors and also often come with infographics. But in this section, it's created in collaboration with the writer. From the art point of view, these can be somewhat similar to the feature articles because we can often commission illustrations and create infographics. But the design process can be quite different because working with external writers means we're not always completely independent. Then news and views is an interesting section of the magazine that sits kind of in between journalism and research. These articles are a type of review written by external authors, scientists, specialists, but they also concentrate on specific research articles published in the same issue. From an information design point of view, I find this part most interesting because for each article, we create an explainer diagram showing in simple visual form what is the main discovery or result of each study. Here is a small selection of various diagrams from News and Views. Although I do like the creativity of working with the longer news stories, is actually News and Views. That's my daily bread and butter, so to speak. And a little bit later on, I'm going to talk a bit more about this specific type of explainer diagram. Finally, the research papers, by far the largest section of the journal. This is the content which is submitted for publication by scientists. Our team of editors and external reviewers evaluate the manuscripts, and the most innovative ones are selected for publication. The charts and graphics, which you can see here, are all created and submitted by the authors. So I mentioned that working with infographics for news features is often the most fun and most creative process. Those feature graphics can take many forms. Sometimes they can be data visualizations or maps. Or in other cases, we might commission an artist to create an illustration for us, which we then use as part of the graphic. Sometimes it can be a combination of a few different elements. No two graphics are the same, and the design process can be a little different depending on what we're doing. But these key stages, which I'll show you, are pretty much always there. Every graphic that we do starts with a design brief from the editor who's editing the story. They will outline what the article is about and include a graphic idea, which can sometimes be a hand-drawn or a digital sketch, PDF attachments, or a list of links to data or graphics in other publications. My job here will be to read and understand the story, look at all the suggestions and try to decide if this is a good candidate for a graphic and how we might want to present it. I will need to ask myself, what is the story that we're trying to tell and how a graphic can enhance that narrative, aid and inform the reader. When I'm ready, I will usually schedule a meeting with the editor to discuss the brief. In this particular case, in this infographic, which I'm going to show you, the process started with a brief from my features editor with a story about urine recycling. I was immediately interested because that's not a topic which we cover every day. The story looks at the rationale for what's called urine diversion, and then the research into how to do it, starting with new toilets and then collecting urine and processing it to make it more useful. The brief suggested a double-page graphic with 3 separate parts. Part 1, the problem of pollution, with maps showing nitrogen pollution around the world and coral reefs impacted by wastewater globally. Part 2 would explore some toilet and urinal designs that allow for urine capture. And finally, part 3 could show technologies and science that can process urine and turn it into fertilizer. I thought this was a great start and a good idea for a graphic, so we arranged a chat with the editor to go through the details more thoroughly. One of the suggestions in the brief was this map of nitrogen pollution from a paper that looked into impacts of sewage on coastal ecosystems. This is certainly an interesting graphic, very granular data and gives a good global overview. But our concern was that we might struggle to show the detail of the map if it becomes a smaller element of the double page. What's more, the map doesn't appear to show a lot of variety along the coastline. The line is almost all purple, with exception for the polar circle, which is obviously less polluted. Which kind of leads us to the question, how interesting is this map for our audience? And in the context of our story, most people know it's all very polluted out there, but can we find a better way of quantifying it? So we agreed with the editor, we might want to research this a little bit further and consider some alternative angles. Which takes me to the next step of the design process, research. Sometimes considered the transformative stage because this is where the idea often changes and develops. Here, me and the editor would explore the theme further, looking for different angles and additional sources. I will also check if similar stories might have been published in other publications and look up some most recent infographic designs on social media for inspiration. For our urine recycling story, I found this great infographic from National Geographic magazine that explored new toilet designs and features really lovely technical illustrations of how they operate. To be fair, this wasn't terribly relevant for our story, being way too technical and toilet design not the main focus for us at all. But it was as close as I could get with toilet infographic inspiration. The editor also suggested a new chart showing social acceptance, which was an interesting new angle. This is the bar chart shown here in the top right. We also managed to come up with more ideas for the pollution graphics, coming from a few different sources. These are models of future pollution on the left, nitrogen fertilizer production in the middle, and the bar chart on the bottom right compares the three main components: nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. And I've put sketching here as the next step of the design process because I want to emphasize the importance of drawing sketches, even though in reality, this usually takes place simultaneously with the research stage. Sketching is the best way to quickly test and discard different ideas. There's absolutely no shame in a bad sketch. The editor will often make a hand-drawn sketch for me to communicate his ideas, or if I'm commissioning an artist to make an illustration, I will ask them to provide a few alternative draft sketches to see what might work and what's the level of detail that we're looking for. I will also make a sketch of the page layout to identify the main story and context graphics and plan the visual structure. And this was the this was the first sketch that I made of the infographic about urine recycling. As you can see, I didn't draw any of the elements, just kind of blocked the space on the page with different sources provided by the editor, trying to see where the main elements are going to be and how much space I might need for different sections. After discussing this with the editor, I would then rearrange everything with some of the new sources that we found. I then drew the diagram of the toilet design because we had agreed that we're definitely including that part. I also sketched out the second diagram based on the notes from the editor's hand drawing. This is going to compare 4 different techniques of making fertilizer. Then I would talk to the editor again and rearrange things again to make a better visual narrative on the page, because one, that social acceptance chart in the bottom corner should probably be a separate section rather than get mixed up with the pollution story. at the bottom. And 2, the toilet design should come first before we talk about turning it into products. So we might want to swap these things around. So when the overall structure is agreed, we can go ahead and finalize the artwork and design. And at this stage, the editor will usually supply some copy for headlines, intro, callouts, labels, and we will get all the necessary data as well to create the charts. We will also make sure that the visual hierarchy is clear, and we will adjust colors and their labels if necessary. When all that is on the page, the graphic is ready for fact checking. The page usually comes back with a long list of corrections from our sub-editing team that searches for factual errors and clarifies any ambiguity in text and graphics. They will also double check all the sources and help us write the credit lines, which is usually the final element that goes on the page. Finally, the graphics will be reformatted for online presentation. And here is one of the later stages of the infographic. Now the charts in the bottom section are drawn in-house style, but the graphic on the right page still needs more work. This is meant to show 4 alternative scenarios of how urine can be collected and turned into fertilizer. As you can see, I originally planned to show all 4 scenarios together in one schematic, but now I see that this might not work. Combining them all together makes it harder to distinguish which one is which, and it's going to get too crowded. Plus, it's not a great use of the space that we have on the page. So in the next step, we make some adjustments. I split that diagram into 4 separate elements and add some more detail. I add the text and callouts received from the editor and the clear heading for the bottom section to help with navigation. And we also rearrange the order of the charts at the bottom to make for a more logical narrative from left to right. And here's a finished graphic with all the final touches. The illustration is finished with more labels added for clarity and numbers to aid navigation. Reflecting design recommendations of our graphics style guide, color is used strategically on the page to highlight and emphasize the key elements, while other parts are toned down to make better contrast. Bold headings are used to create clear hierarchy and lead readers through the page. When everything is in good shape and credit lines are added, all that's left to do is to prepare the graphic for the website. And this is usually done by splitting the graphic into smaller components, which can be embedded in a vertical column online. The main focus of this urine recycling graphic, which I've just shown, was definitely on the schematic diagrams. And although we did include charts and data to tell a story of pollution, you might have noticed that I didn't spend a ton of work on these charts. In fact, we didn't make a lot of changes compared to how these charts appear originally, how they appeared originally in the sources. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, and it's often the case for many graphics that we publish. But when we're talking about data graphics and data visualization, we usually refer to stories where we perform our own transformations and create more custom visualizations. One tool that helps our team enormously when it comes to data visualization is a custom-built style guide, which we developed in recent years. The document shows how nature data graphics should look, from typography, strokes, spaces, and colors for visual consistency to data viz best practice and common errors which designers and editors need to avoid. It's important to know what type of chart should be used for a different type of data and how to create insightful comparisons. The design process for these graphics can be a little different. Let me show you a couple of examples. One opinion story during the COVID pandemic focused on critical technology metals like cobalt or lithium, and how lockdowns had a big impact on their suppliers. The editor from the opinion section suggested we do a graphic showing how metal prices changed over the period, and she provided this data set in a spreadsheet. You can see all the metal prices shared the same unit, dollars per ton. So first we tried plotting them like that on a line chart, and this was the result. The problem with this was that some metals are much cheaper than others, and the lines become kind of horizontal, and it's not possible to show any trends. However, when the prices were plotted individually, this chart on the right shows cobalt, then you can clearly see the trend with the price decreasing and then increasing again. So we thought maybe we could try using percentage change instead of dollar per ton unit. This is also called an indexed chart. So we recalculated the values in the spreadsheet into percentage change and then plotted the chart again. This was better. Now we could see some clear trends, but we also had too many lines overlapping, and this wasn't very easy to read. So we showed it to our editor to discuss, and we decided it might be best to show this with 3 separate charts to highlight different trends. And at this stage, we would move the graphics to Illustrator to add our brand colors and fonts, also including intro text, key, and labels. Finally, added small callouts to each chart to navigate people through and explain what's going on. And this was the final graphic on the page. And another opinion story at the time focused on pandemic responses in different cities around the world. The authors suggested this chart showing correlation between COVID cases and the reaction time in Chinese cities. This was meant to illustrate that you need to act quickly to restrict the spread of the virus. They also suggested another graphic to show that there was no correlation between population density and COVID cases. They sent us data about the cities with 3 variables: population density, response time, and number of cases per 1,000 people. And we thought that with 3 variables, we might want to try either a scatter plot or a bubble chart. And for something like that, we usually use an online tool called Raw, which allows us to try different versions really quickly and export them into the right format. We first tried plotting reaction time versus reaction time versus cases, but that didn't work very well because all the points get kind of clustered in the corner. But the second version with reaction time versus population density worked much better. And then we moved it to Illustrator to add our own style and add labels. We also decided to make some tweaks to the first chart about reaction time in Chinese cities. We highlighted cities from the Hubei province with a different color because they all showed as outliers in the data set. We added labels for selected cities for better context. We also removed the trend lines, which were there before, and they kind of seemed redundant because you can see what the trend is. We indicated the log scale clearly. We've got something in the style guide to show us how to do that. And we added a vertical dashed line for 0, which kind of visually separates those cities which imposed restrictions after the first case from those which acted earlier. And that was the finished graphic on the page. Now, moving on to a different kind of graphics. With these are usually more figurative. It needs to be mentioned that the content and audience is a little different in the news and views section, and we need to take that into account. The content of these expert reviews is much more technical compared to magazine content like news or opinion. But we expect that most readers will be specialists who understand the topic. Designing for an expert scientific audience is unique because we don't need to worry so much about the level of literacy of the readers. And we can use some visual shortcuts that would not work with the general audience. But this audience is also very demanding. We are expected to deliver high quality, original stories and follow high standards of accuracy and clarity. Because these articles are written by external experts, means we need to collaborate with both the editor and with the author to create these explainer graphics. Here's one example of how this might go. The editor will usually get in touch to discuss a new story and an idea for a graphic. For this story, it was one of the articles for our special issue about racism in science. The story discussed how skin color affects the inaccuracy of medical devices called pulse oximeters, which measure blood oxygen levels. The authors suggested this draft for a figure. And this is meant to show that because of the bias in study enrollment, the devices are not calibrated correctly to account for patients with darker skin. And this results in Black patients receiving a higher proportion of false negative results. But this draft is very technical and quite hard to explain. Some of the elements, like the chart at the bottom left and in the middle, are hard to interpret without additional information. Those icons representing people in the top left, I think that's really ambiguous and open for interpretation. So this draft clearly needs some more work. We would then discuss this with the editor, and we conceived an alternative. In this new version, the first panel shows the principle of how a pulse oximeter works, and the second panel shows a comparison between light and dark skin. The editor would then go and discuss this idea with the author. Later, we would develop the draft further based on the author's comments. Firstly, we thought that showing the actual device on the finger provides better context, and secondly, including the light pulse going through skin in the second panel makes a clearer visual link between the panels A and B. Then, when this sketch is okayed by the author, we can draw all the illustrations and send it back to the author for more feedback. Then they would point out that in this particular case, people with light skin also have melanin and melanosomes, but in different quantities. So that should be shown more accurately in the drawing. Moreover, the light scattering doesn't quite work like this, and that also needs to be corrected and redrawn. So this one was my next attempt, and there were actually a few more versions. One more, until the authors were happy with the result. The last example that I want to show you today is another explainer graphic. This one is for a story about artificial cilia that bend in different directions depending on how they are illuminated. These are figures from the research papers which we were publishing. And as you can see, it is very detailed and quite technical. And this is the graphic proposal from the author. It's a little hard to see at first what's going on, but it's actually a very good start. What the author is trying to show is two structures where the front one is illuminated in yellow and one in the back in orange is hidden in shadow cast by the front one. Then in the second step, it's kind of shown in the middle, the front structure twists to allow light to fall onto the structure in the back. The second element that's quite important here is the molecular composition of these structures that change with light. There's straight shapes inside the material in the first panel. They represent polymer molecules, which then change into L shapes in the next stage. This allows the structures to change their shape. So to better understand what's going on, we went back to the paper to look at the figures again. We found one that shows how the structures twist in 3D and more detail of how the molecules behave inside the material. Finally, there were illustrations of how arrays of cilia can display collective motion, which was crucial for this study. With this, we had enough information to try and rework the sketch. And the new version had two panels. One showing how the molecules allow for material deformation, and the second panel showing the collective movement. The author was happy with this, and it was ready for the drawing. This was the first attempt, where I tried to show the material bending as a 3D cross-section of one of the structures. Unfortunately, this created some ambiguity because it's not 100% obvious which direction the material is bending. And so in the final version, we used a simpler side view and used two panels for easy comparison. So I've shown you some different examples of graphics that we do, but you might be wondering, what is the takeaway from all this? Are these some random pics of some pretty looking artworks, or is there some overarching logic here connecting it that helps us make science more understandable? And what makes it a nature graphic? So before I finish, let me do a little wrap up of some of our information design rules that we follow at Nature Art. It's crucial to ask questions during the process, even if sometimes they might feel simple or silly. What is the story that I'm trying to tell? What is the information which I'm communicating? And what is the main point? Is this the best way of presenting these findings? What can be added or removed to make the message clearer? Or even, does it need to be a graphic? Occasionally, we're getting briefs with figures that could be better displayed as lists or tables. Quite often, these graphics are basically tables dressed up with little illustrative icons. They don't really help with communication. And scientific diagrams often visualize complexity. Therefore, it is essential to ensure that every element is defined and doesn't leave readers guessing. We try to avoid ambiguity as much as possible. Using reliable sources and having multiple people checking graphics along the way helps us avoid mistakes. Avoiding unnecessary decoration is also usually a good idea. When creating complex graphics, extra decoration can easily become a distraction, getting in the way of communicating clearly. One of the main principles of graphic design and also information design, is visual hierarchy. Our job as designers is to try to guide the reader's attention through different layers of information by creating a visual order of importance. There are a few different techniques that can be used to create such hierarchy. We often use color in our figures to highlight and give prominence to the most important elements. And we tone down the colors of the background of the secondary items. But color can also be used to link elements together visually, highlighting specific relationships. Similarly, typography and layout of the graphic should be used to guide the reader, for example, by using bolder or bigger labels for prominence. And drawing for focus is another technique. We can often make parts of the illustration more prominent by drawing it differently with more detail. Using similar colors and visual codes consistently in many graphics helps the audience to decode this visual language and understand our graphics. The visual style guides, templates, and asset libraries that we use, they help us build that visual consistency, but also aid our team and help us avoiding errors. Our style guide defines how to create data visualization and scientific diagrams with house style color palettes and detailed information on how to draw scientific illustration. And another important principle for our team is accessibility. We aim to create illustrations that are as accessible as possible to those with disabilities, such as color blindness or other visual impairments. We're using the style guidelines to ensure that our graphics can be used and understood by all our readers. For good readability and contrast, we don't use text below a certain size for our graphics in print and in online. We avoid colored text and text on colored backgrounds. And we also considered color blindness when redesigning our color palettes. We're also conscious to avoid certain color combinations which are known to be problematic. And this is all I have for today. Thank you very much.